Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming here this evening to welcome me to Chennai. This is the first book tour I have made of India, but not the first time I visited here. I've been here on a number of occasions as a tourist, just blending in with everyone else, and I have developed a great fascination and, dare I say it, love of India. I find everything about India so very different, so exciting. The energy of the country, the millions and millions and myriads of people of different religions and different languages, the changing landscape, the architecture and the great history behind the country. I also love the food, and dare I say it, I even quite enjoy the traffic. I said to my wife, it's like playing a video game, but the difference in this game, if you lose, you die. The first time I came here, I had a driver called Ashok, and he drove my wife and I all around India, and he was tremendous. I mean, he'd overtake 8 trucks in a line with oncoming traffic, and as he pulled back into the left side again, I'd say, "Shabash, Ashok." And he said to me, "Mr. Smith, if you're going to drive in India, you have to have 4 things. You have to have good brakes. You have to have good eyes. You have to have good nerves. And you have to have good luck." I thought when I came here this evening, I'd like to tell you something about my life as a writer. And you already know that my first book was published in 1964, but I wrote another before that, a book that has never seen the light of day and never been published. It was a disaster, to say the least of it, but it was good because I made all the mistakes in that book and mistakes that I haven't repeated since. There's one copy of that book left. Even my wife doesn't know where I've hidden it. And I think when I go into the big box at the end of the game, I'll take it with me so no one else will ever read it. Like anything that you endeavor in life, it doesn't start at the top. You have to work your way up. And I, having had my first book accepted for publication in England, I decided I would go to England for the great day. I'm not sure what I really expected to find there. I thought perhaps as I got off the plane, there might be 20 or 30 or 50 journalists all with cameras taking my photograph and wanting to make wise and witty speeches. I thought that I would see every bookstore in London jammed with my books and posters screaming, "A great new literary genius hits the scene." I thought even maybe the Queen might invite me to Buckingham Palace for a tea. None of these things happened. In fact, I found myself wandering around from one bookstore to another looking for my book. And often I found it in the back room with the children's books. So I would take the book out, hide it under my coat, get it to the front of the shop and put it in a window. Anyway, I was caught doing that by the owner of the bookshop, and he phoned my publishers up and said, "Keep that young author of yours out of my shop." So, somewhat discouraged, I decided I'd better go back to Africa, where at least I knew what was happening. So I was in Heathrow Final Departures Lounge, waiting for my plane back to Cape Town. And as I was sitting there, I looked across the room and I could not believe my eyes. A miracle had happened. I went, the hair on the back of my neck went up. Goosebumps on my arms. And there, on the other side of the lounge, was a lady, and she was reading my book. My heart beat faster. I watched her avidly. Was she going to smile? Was she going to burst out laughing? Or was she going to burst into tears with the pathos of my book? But nothing happened. She just kept reading. And finally, I could contain myself no longer. So I stood up, crossed the lounge, stood in front of her, and I said, "Excuse me, madam." And she looked up, and I said, "I think you should know that that's my book you're reading." She said, "Oh." And she took the book and put it in my hands. She said, "I'm so terribly sorry, I just found it lying here." But things improved after that. And I was invited a year or two later with another two or three books under my belt. I was invited to New York City to sign books at Doubleday Bookstore. Now, Doubleday Bookstore on Fifth Avenue is the largest bookstore in the world. It's 12 stories high. It's as big as the Taj Hotel. And so I thought that was quite an honor. I accepted, of course, with alacrity. I flew to New York, and on the chosen day I left my hotel, took a taxi, went up to the bookstore, and I expected the whole staff of the bookstore to be out there to greet me, and the general manager to shake my hand and usher me in. But no, I was standing on the pavement once again on my own. So I wandered into the bookstore, and I thought, what do I do? And I saw someone who worked there. She was a young lady behind the till collecting the money from the people who were buying books. So I joined the queue and stood there and worked my way up to the front. When I came to her, she said, "Yes, sir, what can I do for you?" And I said, "I'm here to sign books." She said, "Are you one of those, are you? What's your name?" So I said, "Wilbur Smith." So she said, "How do you spell Wilbur, with a W and E?" So I said, "W." So she looked on her piece of paper. She said, "Yes, you're on the list. Fourth floor, take the elevator up. You'll turn right from the elevator and you'll find your table there with your books and on it, and go ahead." So I said, "Well," I thought, "that's a warm welcome." So I went up to the 4th floor, and sure enough, there was my table with a huge pile of books, a glass of water, lots of pens, and nobody there to buy my book. So I sat there for some considerable time, and then I looked across to the other side of this huge room, and there was another author. An author, well-known author of Western novels, and he was sitting at a table like mine, and like me, his books were piled up, but he was signing books frantically, and yet there was nobody there standing in front of him. So I thought, that is very strange. I better find out what's happening here. So I went across to him and I said, "Excuse me, who are you signing those books for?" He said, "It doesn't matter who I'm signing them for. If I write on them, the bookstore cannot send them back to my publisher. And I get paid a royalty." I said, "Oh." I shot back to my little table. And I signed 300 books in something like 10 minutes. And then I had some time on my hand. And so I was really very, very smug and pleased with myself. I looked around, and then there was a whole shelf of Freddie Forsyth books. So I thought, now Freddie's a good man and a good friend of mine. So I did him a big favor. I signed all his books. One of the things about being an author, you're You're not a sportsman, you're not a television presenter, you're not a film star, so you can walk about everyone, no one recognizes you. And this happened to me with the publication of my book, The Sunbird. I was going to fly from London to New York and then up to Alaska to go fishing. But whilst I was in London, my British publishers said to me, would you take a copy, the first copy of Sunbird, the first one off the press, read it on the plane, and just make sure that everything is to your liking and there aren't any obvious mistakes. So I said, fine. So I had my book with me, and got on the Concorde it was, and flew, we took off. Halfway across the Atlantic, I was reading my book. And a gentleman sitting two aisles up from me came back and said, excuse me, but I see you reading Wilbur Smith's book. So I said, yes, I read all his books. So he said, what do you think of him as an author? I said, pure genius. So he said, well, I'm so glad that you feel that way about him, because Wilbur Smith happens to be a very good friend of mine. So I said to him, I can hardly believe that. So he said, look, I'll tell you what I'll do with you. Give me your card, and I will, the next time I see Wilbur, I'll ask him to sign a book for you and send it to you. And I said, do you think he would do that? He said, Wilbur do anything for me. So I gave him my card, and he put it in his top pocket without reading it, and said, you'll hear from me. And funnily enough, I never have. But one of the really good things about being an author is not only the fact that you entertain people, you get a chance to do that, but in some instances what you have turned out, the books you've turned out, make a real difference in people's lives. And I love it when I get a letter from educationists or parents saying, little Johnny would never read a book until we gave him one of your books, and now he's an avid reader, and he reads widely on other books because you have given him that gift. People I find who read books are more, how can I say, informed, intellectual, they think more deeply than people who never read books. And there's one relationship I remember that I developed with a gentleman living in Houston, Texas. His name was Jack. He wrote to me very early on in my career and said he'd read my book and he really enjoyed it, and thank you very much. And then with each book he would write to me and we'd exchange, he'd give me his views on it. And excuse me. And then I had a letter from him after a number of years saying, Wilbur, I'm sorry to have to tell you, but our relationship has to come to an end. He says, because I'm 89 and my next birthday, and my eyesight is going. And so I won't be able to read your books in future. And it just happened that the week before, I had been sent by my publishers a large letter, a large-scale edition of my book, which was printed especially for people with impaired eyesight. And I took the book, put it in an envelope, wrote a letter back to Jack, and I said, Jack, it doesn't have to end. You've got to put up with my books for a while yet. Here's the one that you can read. And I sent it off to him. And apparently I only heard from his wife afterwards what happened. Jack got the book, opened it up, found it, and he was so over the moon with excitement that he wrote 2 letters. One was to me to thank me for sending him the book and how much he enjoyed it and what my friendship had meant to him. And the other one was a letter to his son in New York saying, "Look what Wilbur Smith has sent me. Isn't this fantastic?" And enclosing the book. But when he took the two books down, or the two letters down to the post office, his eyesight was so bad he got them mixed up. He sent me a letter saying, "Look, my book back, look what Wilbur Smith has sent me," and it's to his son. "Thank you very much for the book, you've changed my life." Which it was great. His wife told me the whole story. And we remained friends for a while. And then I got a letter from his wife to say, "I'm terribly sorry to tell you now that just before his 92nd birthday, my husband Jack passed away. And but he asked, in his will, he stipulated that all your books had to be in the coffin with him to go on the next voyage." And she sent me a photograph, and there was Jack in the coffin, looking very dapper in a nice dark suit and white satin pillow under his head, and all my books around him. And I thought, "Jack, good voyage, mate. You know, thank you very much. That is the most sincere compliment I could actually take by anyone." Another moving experience I've had with readers was I was in Australia and staying in a hotel in Sydney, and I was checking out after an event like this. And as I stood at the desk, I heard someone else at the receptionist further down the line saying, "But I have to see him, I have to see him." And I didn't take much notice. Then I heard my name. The receptionist said, "I'm terribly sorry, but Mr. Wilbur Smith is already checked out of the hotel." So I went across to the two of them and I said, "Excuse me, I am Wilbur Smith. Do you want to talk? Did you want to speak to me?" And he turned to me, and he was a youngster of 17 and a half, and he said, "Oh, thank goodness I've found you. Thank goodness I've been able to meet you, because I've traveled 5 hours by train to come down to see you, and I have to tell you that I have to tell you my story." So I looked down and I realized that he'd lost a leg. His right leg was missing and he had a prosthesis. So I said, "Okay, fine, I've got 10 or 15 minutes and let's have a cup of tea together," and we talked. And he told me how, as a youngster of 13 or 14, he'd been coming down to school on the school train with all his friends, and they were, horsing around as kids do. And they all climbed up on the roof of the train, and they were pushing each other and racing up and down the roof of the train, and he slipped and he fell. And he went under the wheels of the train and he had his leg cut off. And he said, "Mr. Smith, I tell you, my life ended right at that moment. I was no longer interested in anything. I realized that there's nothing more I could do with this disability that was inflicted on me." And then he said, "I picked up your book, The Leopard Hunts in Darkness, where the hero also loses a leg in a minefield during the war, and yet he triumphs over his disability and comes out almost a better man for it." And he said, "Today I'm head of school." He said, "I am the chairman of the debating society and the chess society, and I am an A student straight through, and I owe this all to you." And I tell you that I almost burst into tears to know that that young man was on his way with a push from me. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you that it's what I've done, and I've been doing for 47, 47 years has been ups and downs, but mostly ups. It's been tears and laughter, but mostly laughter. And I am delighted to be standing in front of you. And when I look at you lot, I think it was worth it. Thank you very much.